Okay. Yeah. All right. Welcome everybody to our very first lesson of just make sure we are recording. I think we said second on it. Yeah, okay. We're gonna have a book here? Okay. So thank you for joining us. This is really a groundbreaking course that JLI has put together. When I first heard of this course, my God, that's what I said, my God, really? 6 weeks of my God? But that's what JLI wants to do, and it really is groundbreaking because it is offering us the opportunity to really get into the deep understanding of what it means, what God really means. And I think we all have a very preliminary understanding, basic understanding, perhaps sometimes an understanding that we picked up from Hebrew school, or movies, who knows? But it's time for us to get into seeing what Judaism says about the divine. And a joke that kind of gets us into the course is a joke that a parent moves out to a new community and looks up the various schools, and they find the only school, Jewish school and a Catholic school, only two private schools. Well, being agnostic, atheist, said, no way am I sending my kid to a Jewish school. I'm going to send him to the Catholic school. And he sends him to the Catholic school. And of course, on day number one, kid comes home and the parent says, so, what did you learn today in school? And so the kid said, well, Dad, I got to tell you, we learned about this thing called Trinity. Dad gets very serious and pulls the kid over and says, let me tell you something, kid. There's only one God, and we don't believe in him. And this is kind of, this joke really kind of taps into the idea that, you know, we all have some type of relationship with God, whether we believe it or not. But there's a relationship that, where does this God come from? Who in Judaism? How are we introduced to God in Judaism? Well, one of the ways that the God that we know and introduced to him is by Abraham. Abraham being the first Jew. And the story is told that when he's in Mesopotamia, there was a place where there were many, many gods. And in fact, more the merrier. The more gods you had, the better. The cooler you were, right? And along comes Abraham with this phenomenal concept called one God, monotheism. And this is where Judaism gets to know and get an understanding into the divine. And this idea of the one God is what this course is all about. And what we're going to be exploring this in many, many ways over the coming weeks. Specifically, we're going to be discussing 25 unique questions. Let's see, someone needs to mute themselves. You can please mute yourself. Okay, I'm not sure who that was. All right. So 25 questions, which I think is a good way, because if you think about one course, you know, Hasidic philosophy could really do a 6-week course on one theme. But we're going to spare you that. Instead, we're going to go through 25 questions, 4 questions we're going to deal with this evening. Some of the questions we're going to deal with, I'm going to tease you guys a little bit. Why did God create evil? Do I need to fear God? Do all religions lead to the same God? There are 25 different questions. We have listed some of these on our JLI emails. But every single one of these questions will be addressed and give you a refreshing insight into our relationship with God and our perspective of God. But the question we have is at the heart of this. What is the purpose of questioning God and having questions about God altogether? And why even bother the course? Everyone says, okay, I believe in God. Who needs more than that? Why do we need to dig into a detailed course about
Unmute your
any kind of
speaker,
questions all about
Patrick. How
God?
do I do that? There.
So there's a Jewish response, no doubt, about this question. But beyond the Jewish response, there's also a general response, which is that each and every single person has a desire to see beyond themselves, to believe in a higher power. This is something that I found very interesting. I speak to people all the time, people from all different backgrounds, and I find sometimes people who are not religious at all will tell me things that they believe in, which I'm like, wow, you believe that? But I mean, the wow is that, and they're not religious. So we see that people are kind of hardwired rather, to believe in a God, something bigger than themselves. And some people really believe in it quite deeply. And this has been going back from the beginning of time. Now, the interesting thing is that as humans, because we are kind of hardwired to believe in God, something greater than us, in other words, something that is greater than ourselves exists, something which we call spirituality. It behooves us to try to understand what that is. In fact, it's actually very healthy to do so. There is a book that was written that came out last year by Lisa Miller. And she is a researcher on neuroscience and genetics. And she actually says that believing in God and actually tapping into this belief is actually very, very, very healthy. And she called it the awakened brain. So in other words, when you do this, you actually become more resilient and robust. It's a fascinating concept, right? When we believe in God, when we tap into this, when we kind of nurture this inherent belief that we have about a higher power, we actually become a better human being. And this is her thesis. Let's take a look at this reading. We're going to test something out for you, which is we have a microphone in the classroom here. So Howard, since you're so close to it, give me a moment to put on my thing. Everybody can hear it on. Too much background noise. Okay. Take it away. Text number 1, the awakened brain.
That's it.
You want to see this?
Give us an valid and natural
While he's doing it, while he's doing it,
means in, through, and on. Whether or not we participate in the practice, whether or not we identify with it. Brain has a natural information of documents. The awakened brain is the neural circuitry that allows us to see it more fully and doesn't. I didn't set out to study spirituality. I discovered it to understand. It's quite a bit, right? The data points and help me see.
Just read here. We just read that.
Covered that the awakened brain is both inherent to our physiology and
Yes, could you hear it? Could you hear Howard read on Zoom?
No.
Okay, good. Okay. That means we can have the participation in the classroom. Fantastic. This is a really interesting idea. So it really, she calls it the awakened brain, which is another word for a spirituality, something deeper than ourselves. That very often people try to understand, and this happens all the time when we faced with a crisis. We try to see a deeper meaning behind it, because inherently human beings are. That's what we like to do. We realize there's something bigger than ourselves. Maybe that the powers to be. We don't always call it God. Not everybody does, but we recognize it's there, and if we can tap into this and nurture it, we can be a healthier person. This is according to her thesis. So from the global perspective, humans have a need to feel accomplished and achieved. They look to the spiritual realm to meet this need. Okay, what about the Jewish interest? So here's a big question. You know, I think a lot of people say, you're having a course with 25 questions about God. Are you even supposed to question God? Is that okay? Shouldn't we just accept God, that he exists, and just be okay with that? And the answer is no. No, it's not good enough just to believe. And in fact, we have an obligation with this is a text number 2 from the Zohar. We're going to ask someone on Zoom. Let's see, Moisha. Okay, who wants to read on Zoom? Why don't you unmute yourself? Who can do it first? Okay, Moisha's got it. This is from the Zohar, actually from the Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Aviyadi, who wrote the Tanya. And he writes that we have a kind of an obligation to know God. Let's go ahead, take it away, please. Text number 2.
The entirety of human existence and purpose is to gain intimate knowledge of God's glory and majestic splendor, each individual to the extent of their intellectual capacity. This goal is stated in the Zohar. God created the world in order that they may know him.
Okay, very good. So God created the world for one reason, so that we may know him. In other words, we have to get to know who God is, what it's all about. So we see that there is, from a Jewish perspective, there is a real need, and almost not just a need, but actually the purpose of creation is to get to know God. God created the world to have a relationship, and so that we should get to know it. To have a relationship, you got to get to know who and what God is. So, as a result of this obligation to know God, philosophers have never backed away from trying to understand God and ask questions, deepening our understanding. So this course actually, how many different sources we're going to be covering in one lesson, all on this topic, because we're going to be tapping into 3,800 years of Jewish knowledge about and wisdom on the divine, on God.
Hasidic rabbi was the student of the Maggid of Mizrach. So it's between the Chabad and the Maggid.
Larry, we can all hear you. If you can just mute yourself, please.
Okay.
All right. So for our first reading, another reading about, we go back to Rabbi Saadia Gaon. Rabbi Saadia Gaon lived in the age of the Geonic period, which is post-Talmudic era. And at this point, it's fascinating. Up until the Talmudic era, the Jewish philosophy didn't really take root. But post the Talmudic era, you start seeing, at least, and having recordings of Jewish philosophy about God. And Rabbi Saadia Gaon is one of those, and he writes a book called Emunas V'Deos, Beliefs and Doctrines. Probably one of the earliest recordings of Jewish theology. Let's take a look at this in his work. So I'm going back at 1200. What year is this? 1,200 years? More than that. Yeah, about 1,200 years. 1,200 years ago. Yeah. So let's take a look. Text number 3. Let's see if someone in the classroom. Michael, you want to read for us? I'm going to turn the mic on. Got it. Got it. It's on. It's on. Text number 3.
Second, ourselves, almost those who they
Shut up. So that's okay. Just you can leave that. Leave it on. That'll be fine. Okay. So here we have giving us two reasons why we need to learn about. Again, this was a big question. Why should I bother? What's the purpose of it? The first reason he says is because it's not that we have a doubt, but rather we need to strengthen our conviction. We need to be stronger in our belief. So the more we learn, the stronger we become. So it's about strengthening our belief in God. That's why it was knowing better what we already understand. That's the first thing. So again, the point being is it's not coming from a point of weakness. Like I doubt myself and therefore I need to understand. No, coming from a point that we believe in God. That's not a question. But we need to strengthen that belief. So the more we learn, the more we study, the more we ask questions, it strengthens our belief. Point number one. Point number two, and this is a point that was true then as it is true today. We have people who like to test our belief. Maybe sometimes we test our own belief. But there are other people who test our belief. What, you really believe that? And Rabbi Sadyagan says you need to know how to respond. You know, and therefore, the more you understand, the better you'll have to respond. And then those people who are questioning their own belief will have what to respond themselves, will have what to answer, will have what to have a reply for themselves. They might not sink with them all the way, but at least they'll have something intellectually to deal with their own issues with their belief in God. By the way, Chris, you open the book. Go ahead. You're perfectly okay to open it. Here, you might as well enjoy it. Okay. But the most important thing that we want to get to is what we spoke about earlier. Yes, we need to further our own belief, strengthen our belief in God. We have to have answers to respond to those who question our belief. But most importantly, as what we said earlier, the idea is that we, as human beings, we're created on this world, better understand God. Why? We want a relationship with Him. We don't have a static relationship with God. We want a real relationship, a dynamic one that we understand, that comprehend, and that only can happen through asking questions. Okay, so let's get right into it. We're going to ask lots of questions, as I said in this course, and there are four questions for tonight's class. Okay, first question is, what is God? Question number two, where is God? Question number three, where did God come to? How did God come to be? And the fourth one, is God a he or a she? Right? So that's keeping you up at night. Okay. We're going to go straight into the first question, which is, what is God? And for this, we have a video. So let's enjoy the first video. It's about something we mentioned a little earlier, which is the question the story that we gave of Abraham. So make sure that you're going to hear the sound. Okay. I hope you'll hear the sound. Let's see. You hear the sound?
Tell me more about God.
Can you hear it?
Sound is coming through now.
The big ones coming as God. So we make the puppet strings of the universe. This is God for the righteous, whom life heaven brings.
Are you hearing the sound of the video?
Sadly, It's Thursday. Yeah.
It's very sporadic.
Yeah, 1 second. I think I know why. 1 minute. 1 minute. Da, 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 da. 1 minute. Let's go share sound. 1 minute. Rusty here. Oh, here we go. Okay, let's go back to the video. Actually, I should probably mute myself. You may hear this in double, so I apologize.
So, you want to know more about God? Let's start with your current conception of God. Is he a big mighty guy in the sky, tugging at the puppet strings of the universe? Does he spend his days golfing with the righteous on lush heaven greens? Is he angry and vengeful, or wise and kind? We all have conceptions of God, picked up along our developing years. But before we delve into secrets of God's being, we need to do some inner household cleaning. You see, thousands of years ago, young Abraham had a similar problem. At the time, people were searching for coherence in a universe that seemed random. So they devised an elaborate system of multiple powers, who each were responsible for a different function. If you got the rain god happy, you got more rain. If the sun god was pleased, you got more sun for your crops. Then the wise men decided that each god was associated with a figure and shape, an idol that you could conveniently buy from your local idol shop. And these figurines had the power to grant or deny your deepest needs and wishes. Abraham's father Terah had just such a shop, and he made the mistake of asking Abraham to man the sales floor for a day. An old woman walked in. "Young man, an idol, please, for my arthritis. Which of these gods is good for my knees?" "How old are you?" Abraham asked. 60, replied the woman. "You poor thing," Abraham said. 60 years old and bowing down to an object that was made yesterday. Embarrassed, the woman slinked away. Next, a woman came in with a plate filled with fine flour. "Take this, young man, and offer it to the idols." But Abraham had a different idea. He took a club and smashed all the idols. He then put the club in the hand of the largest idol. When Terah came to the store, he was furious. "What have you done to the idols?" "I must be honest with you," Abraham responded. "A woman came with a plate of fine flour and asked me to offer it to them. When I set it before them, one of the idols exclaimed, 'I'm starving. I will eat first.' Another quickly protested, 'No, I will eat first.' That started a huge fight. What a scene! The largest idol then stood up, grabbed that club, and smashed the rest of them. "Are you mocking me?" Terah shouted. "Do the idols have any awareness?" Abraham smiled. "Exactly." Abraham went on to teach people what God is not. Before humanity could begin to know what God is, they had to unlearn their crooked conception of him. We are not so different from school or from home or from Hollywood. We ingest portraits of God that stay stuck in stone, not growing with us as we mature and our intelligence blossoms. If and when we decide we want to expand our understanding of God, we must first do what Abraham did. We have to unlearn before we learn. Before constructing God, we need to deconstruct.
Okay, so this is a really important task because we have these misconceptions and we need to try to do what Abraham did, is deconstruct them. Sometimes they're unhealthy. Perhaps one of the things that we really want to get to is firstly making a kind of disclaimer that we can't really understand God himself. And you might say, what am I doing here for the next 6 weeks so I can't understand God? Well, God is infinitely greater than our ability to truly understand it. So that's an important thing that we want to make clear. But what we can do is know about God. In other words, the way God has chosen to interact with us, with his creations. And that's what we're going to do. This idea that God himself is somewhat unknowable is seen in one of the words that we refer to as God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now the word Kadosh means separate, it means holy, but it means it's separated from the mundane. So when we think of God as being Kadosh, Kadosh Baruch Hu, holy, blessed be he, we're essentially saying that God is holy, aloof, separated from us in a way that we cannot understand and comprehend. And so often, though, unfortunately, we place our own limited understandings onto God and come up with a very false narrative of who God is. So at the very essence, God is beyond our understanding. And it's important not to try to portray God in ways which just don't make sense. There is a famous saying that says, God created man in his image, and we return the favor, creating God in our image. And this is very often what happens. We see ourselves and we try to, as X, Y, and Z, and we try to extend that image onto who God might be. So if we're vengeful, then we think about God, that might be that vengeful person in that very limited way, not understanding truly who God is. So it's important to sometimes, that's one reason why this lesson is all about, is at the very essence, God is undefinable. And secondly, we want to try to exclude our own definitions onto God. What's interesting is that oftentimes Jews particularly have this obsession with trying to understand God, sometimes through very, very misconstrued ways. And over the years, Jews have, as we know, if we open up the Bible, Tanakh, Jews have been this has been their biggest downfall, is coming up with idolatrous behavior, which has been a way for them to try to create a God in their own image, so to speak. Interestingly, though, you might wonder, well, how does that connect to us? Jews typically today are not the most idolatrous people. Idolatry is not the Jews, although you said that there are many Jews who practice some form of idolatry. But overall, that was true thousands of years ago, perhaps less true today. But fascinatingly, Adin Steinsaltz, who's heard of Adin Steinsaltz? Great scholar who passed away during COVID, unfortunately. He was born in Israel, translated the Talmud. He makes this it's in text number 6a and 6b. We're going to skip the text just because I want to get to, we're running a little behind time. I want to try to keep on schedule. And he says basically an interesting thing. He says, what's the issue with God? The issue with God typically, that everybody has, is how am I supposed to have a relationship with an abstract, invisible, non-touchable God, divine? It seems very difficult, right? So that's a big challenge that people have with God. And as a result of that, there is this urge to try to create a God, he says, that is somewhat tangible and not so abstract, not so aloof, and not invisible. And he says Jews throughout the ages have been at the forefront of many religions, but then he says not only religions, but isms as well. Because idolatry is not just about creating a false God, it's really about creating things that are of a God, of proportionate of God. In other words, they take up so much of our imagination that they become our false gods. And so Jews have been at the forefront of many isms, communism, for example, socialism, many other isms throughout history. We've been at the forefront because a Jew who is always looking for something deeper, something more meaningful, has found but found a invisible God to be a little more too aloof, instead of delving deeper like we're doing tonight to truly understand they veer off the path and find some other ism to connect with. I think it's very true about society at large, not just Jews, but it's true about Jews who have been at the forefront of many movements throughout history. And very often it is as a result to replace their misunderstanding, or their lack of understanding about who God truly is. So because they can't appreciate, but in some point in time, they were creating the golden calf to try to have a more tangible version of a divine figure. Later on, it may have been some other type of idolatrous behavior, maybe bowing down to the Baal, etc., etc. But throughout history, Jews have tried to gravitate to some form of idolatrous behavior. In later day times, perhaps it was the Jews' fascination with the Greek culture, or the Roman culture, or some of the arts. And each time they get really behind it, oftentimes at the cost of their own religion, because it's coming to replace their religion, or to fill the void of their religion. And it's sad because at the heart of it is a lack of understanding about who God truly is. So they need to replace that void. They don't feel they can have a tangible relationship with an intangible God. So it begs us to really not make that same mistake. Not make that same mistake of trying to create God in our own image and replacing God that we have with things that are more tangible, whether they are another religion or they're another ism. I think in today's culture, this is a big deal for many, unfortunately. So here we are tonight. We're going to get into the first question we have. We just gave the answer to. Can we understand God? At the very heart, we can't. We only understand things about. Slides over here. Sorry, I'm not on top of these slides as much as I'd like to be. Here's a quote: "Idolatry is an attempt of simple people to give a form to the divine image, lending to a more concrete type of relationship." It's a very interesting idea. So back to the first question: what is God? We don't know. We can only understand things about Him. Okay. And I think what we're trying to say over here is that, in a way, we are limiting the conversation. And it's important to bear this in mind that at its very essence, God is unknowable. But He has made Himself knowable to us through certain means, and it is those means, those things about Him, which He makes Himself knowable to us, that we are going to be discovering in this course. So the first question, the question number 2 is, what is God? We don't know. What is the second question for tonight's lesson? Where is God? And this is a really interesting question. Because if you think about it, where is God? Let me raise some hands. Where's God? Anyone know? Yeah, down here. Where's God? Everywhere. Where do other people? What else do people think about where God is? In the heavens, right? Look up to the heavens, right? A lot of people think God's in the heavens, right? So it begs. I had this question often as a kid: was God in the heavens, or is God down here? When we grew up, there was a famous Uncle Moishe song. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. Up, up, down, down, right, left, and all around. Here, there, and everywhere. That's where He can be found. So God is everywhere. But then we say, no, God's in the heavens. We wear our yarmulke on our heads. God's above us. Which one is it? Right? Good question. Okay, so we're going to do a little exercise here. I should have brought pens. But if you had an imaginary pen in front of you, if you have a pen, and you have to draw a picture of God. In the box below, if you have a pen on you, or if you have one on your phone, draw a representation of the wall, then add a representation for God. If you don't have a pen, do it in your imagination, right? You have a paper. Where's God on that paper, and where's the wall? Okay. Anybody do that exercise? I should have put some pens out, I apologize. Soda's out, forgot the pens. Anybody did the exercise? Did you draw a picture of God and the wall? Anybody? No? Okay. Very often people will draw a picture and it'll look like this. It'll look like a picture of the wall. God will be in the middle, right? You can imagine a big circle, God's in the center, right? God is everywhere, right? That would be one way. Correct? Anybody? Be that? Okay. Okay, good. You know, there's a joke that's told of two mischievous boys. These are kids that the teachers cannot control with all the money in the world. Finally, the chief rabbi comes to town and the principal of the school is had it and says, okay, this is my only chance. Let me see, this chief rabbi will come in and try to talk to the kids. Pulls the boys in and enters into the principal's office. Principal's not there. And one boy is even too scared to come to school. The other kid gets into the office. And with a bellowing voice, the chief rabbi looks at the kid and says, "Where is God?" Looks like baffled. "Tell me, where is God?" Just one more scream. The kid is so scared. He runs out of there, runs home, locks himself in the closet and stays there for an hour. Finally, his brother comes over and says, "What happened? What happened?" He says, "Boy, we're in big, big trouble. God's missing and they think we did it." Okay, so where is God? Good question, right? And as we just said, we had two answers. One is God's in the heavens. The other one, he's everywhere. Right. There are a lot of verses that describe God as being in the heavens. Let's have a read. Text number 7. Somebody on Zoom. Anybody like to read for us on Zoom? Text number 7. First one to the mic.
I'll do it.
Take it away.
Gaze down from the heavens, your holy dwelling place, and bless your people Israel.
All right. Famous word. Gaze down upon the heavens. So God's in the heavens, right? Avinu Shebashamayim, that's what we say, God's in the heavens. We say someone who is a God-fearing man. In Hebrew, we call him a Yirei Shamayim, a man who is fearful of Shamayim, the heavens. In Yiddish, you know how they say God in Yiddish? Anyone know? The Eibishter. Have you heard that word before? Raise your hand if you heard that word, the Eibishter. Anyone heard that word before? Yeah? Amber's heard it. Okay, very good. Eibishter. What does Eibishter mean? One above, right? People daven, they pray, raise your eyes to the heavens. On the other hand, we have famous Uncle Moshe song, Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere, right? God is everywhere. Which one is it? Take a look at text number 8. I'll read this for you. Holy, holy, holy is the God of the heavenly host. The entire world is filled with his glory. We say this every day in the prayers. Kadosh, 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 right? Remember those words? You hear it in the prayers, you hear it during the Musaf, Amida, and the repetition. You go like this, holy, 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 mimicking the angels. The entire world is filled with God's glory. So God's everywhere. So which one is it? Is God in the heavens? Or is he? So what's the issue? What's the issue with saying that God is in the heavens? Anybody? If we say God's in the heavens, what are we saying? He's in the heavens. He's not down here. Very good. God's in the heavens. Okay, I'll go and sneak a cheeseburger. He's not watching. He's busy watching the clouds in the heavens. Okay, but really, it limits to God to saying he's a heavenly thing, not an earthly. No, he's not involved in this world. If we say God's everywhere, what is the problem then? Well, if I say God is everywhere, what comes to mind first? The God or everywhere? Everywhere, right? Everywhere is, there's everywhere, and God is everywhere. Right? That's also a problem. Because then we're limiting God to where? Everywhere. Right? Take a look at the slides here. They kind of everywhere. God in the heavens limits God, contracts our belief that God is omnipresent. We say he's just there. On the other hand, if we say everywhere, also limits God because we're confining God to a created space. Right? So where is God? Where is God? Said the chief rabbi. He's missing. He's not in heaven. He's not everywhere. So where is he? All right. So now, interestingly, if God, one of the names for God actually is Makom, which Hebrew means place or space, right? Now, if you think about it, that's an interesting way. God's not an astronaut. Why are we calling him space? That was a joke. Why are we calling God space? And where do we call? Does anyone know when do we use the word makom for God? It's a very common usage. It's you don't see it. I'm sorry, it's not very common, but there's one place where we do say it. Anyone know? Anyone on Zoom? Everyone's watching you guys on Zoom. The whole class is watching you on Zoom. We can all see you. We say when we're visiting a mourner, right? What do we say? Hamakom yenachem eschem. May the omnipresent, may God, makom, comfort you, right? So we have this idea that God is a space. Now, in a way, it is an interesting way to define God as being a space, place, space. So why do we call God the place? The Midrash explains, text number 9, I'm going to read this for you because it's a short one. Hu makom shel oh, read in Hebrew. I finish off. God, this is text number 9 in your book, page 14. God is the space of the universe. The universe is not the space of God. Let's read that again. It's a complicated one. God is the space of the universe. The universe is not the space of God. So when we think about space, right? When we think about space, this chair, this table, it's sitting here because we have space. With no space, there's no table. Space is what contains everything. So in a way, space contains us. But in reality, God is encompassing even the space that contains us. Okay? It's a bit of a tricky one. But if you think of space, if you drew a picture of God and you made a wall as being the space, and you put God, GD, in the middle as being God being in the space everywhere, in reality, that is not the correct answer. That is the space that we find God within, but it's not the only space where God is. In fact, God is the piece of paper that you wrote the space on. In other words, God is what contains the space, because space is a created being that's something that God created. So God is within the space that he created, but he's not limited to that space. So as Howard pointed out, when we said, if you think of God, if I said everywhere and God, the first thing that comes to mind is everywhere, because often we conceptualize God as being everywhere within everywhere that we know, which is the space of the universe. But in reality, that everywhere is what God created. So while God finds himself within the space, he's not limited to that space that he created. He's encompassing, not contained within it. Let's take a look at some of the slides here. Might help us a little bit. It's probably a little technical here. Okay. This previous slide. God holds the world and enables it to exist. That's kind of what we were talking about just now. See, he is the paper with which in the space is contained. It's a very deep understanding of God. Perhaps too difficult for us to understand because we only know space. Without space, we don't exist. But that is kind of the biggest portrait that we can draw of God. As being so big, he could, at the space that he created, he's even beyond that. He is that and beyond. Practically, where is God? So this is an interest. This is, we're going to review this in a second. Because it seems very abstract. God's everywhere. God's in the space and beyond that space. But how do we understand this in a meaningful, personal way? There's a story told of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk. He was a 19th century Hasidic rebbe. He was known to have a very sharp wit. And he once hosted a group of scholars in his home, came to visit the Holy Rebbe. Who comes to visit the Rebbe? Simple people, business people, and also scholars. They want to sit with the Rebbe and learn Torah on a deep level that only the Rebbe can give them. And so you can imagine you sitting in front of this Holy Rebbe. You're a learned scholar. And so, and the Rebbe of Kotsk turns to you and says, "No, where is God?" And you're thinking to yourself, the Rebbe's asking me, like, I'm not you're asking of a 5-year-old, where's Hashem? Why are you asking me? And they said, everywhere, of course. So guess what he answered? Very, very beautiful words. He said, God is present only where he is permitted to enter. Very powerful words. God is present only where he is permitted to enter. What he was telling his guests is, don't fall into the trap to try to intellectualize God. I understand how his presence is here, it's everywhere, and I understand what everywhere truly means, like he just gave you the deep philosophical concept. But the more important thing is, and perhaps more relevant to us, is a question that we need to answer is, are we allowing God into our own lives? Or are we relegating God to the holy places, the books? This is a really big question. This is probably a bigger question than all the other questions that we have. It's very easy to philosophize about God, but in our own personal life, we leave God out of the picture. He doesn't come in. Don't let him in, quite literally. When we're doing something we shouldn't be doing, we're basically saying to God, no, you can't come in right now. Or I don't believe you're here. Or you're not here. Or I don't want you here at this moment. And so what he's saying, where is God? Wherever you let him in. And what Mendel of Kotsk was saying to these great scholars, by the way, he wasn't telling this to the riffraff. So you have to let God into your most mundane areas of your life, and perhaps especially into those most mundane areas of your life. Our interactions with our colleagues, our friends, when we're happy, when we're sad, when we're struggling, then we have to ask ourselves and let God enter into our lives. Find God's presence there as well. But in order to do that, we have to let him in. So again, we've come through a few very powerful questions about where God is. Let's go through them before we move on to the next question. Where is God was question number 2. Everywhere is in God. That was the first answer. Oh, 1 second. I think I'm going. Okay. Okay, let's go back here then. Okay, so we're going to go back. We're going to just go through these questions. Where is God? First answer we gave, God is in the heavens. And when we say that God is in the heavens, what does that mean? Let's go over this. Why do we say God is in the heavens? I missed this point out, so I'm glad you went through it. I have it on the slide. Because the feeling that God is utterly beyond us. That's the purpose. We say God is in the heavens, we recognize that he's above us. He's beyond us. The answer beyond our comprehension, much, much bigger than us. He's in the heavens, he's above us. Okay. The second thing that we say when we talk about where is God is we say everywhere. This is again another point which I want to express, which is an attempt to see the world as an expression of God. This is very important. When we say, and this is Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. What does that mean? I said this to my Hebrew school kids always, when we say Hashem Echad, God is one. He's one with the universe. He's here with the universe. He is everywhere, which means that everything in this universe is happening because God is there. God is present. God wants it to happen. Everything is an expression of God. That's what we mean when we say God is everywhere. It is an expression of God. Whoever that one lucky person won the lottery in California, that was an expression of God, believe it or not. But it wasn't an expression of God to someone in Westminster, namely anyone here at present company. But the truth is, it was an expression, and that's the idea. When we say God is everywhere, it means everything that happens in this world, whether we like it or not, understand it or not, appreciate it or not, is an expression of God. He's everywhere. Nothing happens by itself. This is a big idea, by the way, which is not for kind of elaborate on maybe later on in the course we will, but it's a big idea. Next thing that we said about God, where is God? Are we allowing God into our lives? Let's open ourselves up. In other words, God is where we allow him to be. Another very big idea that we should take to heart, perhaps. Something we can walk away with. Okay, something we're going to do tomorrow that we perhaps would have thought about doing just kind of casually, maybe because we think that we're going to let God into that particular area. We're going to do it a little differently. Maybe it's a conversation with a coworker. Maybe it's a conversation with a spouse, conversation with a child. Bring God into that conversation. Doesn't mean you're saying God in that conversation, but you're recognizing the God that there is something bigger, a bigger power, and you're also you're recognizing that there is more to the conversation than just you and the person talking to. Letting God in, letting spirituality in. Okay. Question number 3. We're doing good on timing here. I've done a lot of questions, by the way. We've done 2 questions. Any questions from anyone here in the classroom or on Zoom? Any questions? Oh, okay. Next question. How did God come to be? This is a big one, right? Who here in the room has pondered this question before? How did God get here? Anybody? Yeah, Michael? Anyone else ponder the question? How did God get here? Took the number 2 train, didn't he? Number 2 train? You haven't thought about it, but you've asked the question, right? You've thought about it, right? Howard, how about you? Have you thought about the question? How did God get here? Who created God? Okay, very good. But at the same time, it is a good question, right? So if you're going on a date, or you're meeting somebody for the first time, what's one of the first questions you ask? So where are you from? Right? Finite, right? It's a good question. Where are you from? And if we're trying to have a relationship with God, perhaps one of the questions we should be is, where are you from, God? How did you get here? We want to have a deeper understanding, right? So where does this question come from? Why does it intrigue us? Well, it intrigues us because we look at the beautiful world around us, here in Colorado specifically, but anywhere for that matter, and we say, well, how did this get here, right? Where did it come from? And if we are today, most people will understand, and they'll say, must have been God. This beautiful world could not have created by itself. We understand that. No mansion ever built itself. No book was ever authored spontaneously, right? But today with AI, you never know. But even then, someone had to program the AI to make the book. So we say God. Well, if we say that the world was an effect and had a cause, and that cause was God, then the next question is, well, God is pretty cool too. He's awesome. Who created this awesome God? It seems to flow right in from these questions that we have. Where did the creator come from? What's the problem? If we answer the question, you know where God came from? He came from X. What's your next question? Who created X? Right? So there's a anecdote told by Stephen Hawking in a book, an opening of his work called A Brief History of Time. Okay, I'm going to read it for you because it sounds better if I read it, try to paraphrase it. Joseph, I see you're asking a question. I'm going to try to get to it in a moment. Okay. So this is a pretty cool story. Listen to this. A well-known scientist once gave a public lecture on astronomy. At the end of the lecture, a little old lady at the back of the room got up and said, "What you've told us is rubbish. The wall is really a flat plate supported on the back of a turtle." Not wishing to demolish this absurd theory by bringing to bear the masses of scientific evidence he had at his command, scientists decided to gently dissuade his opponent by making her see some of the inadequacies of her position. "If your theory is correct, madam," he asked, "what did this turtle stand on?" "You're a very clever man, and that's a very good question," replied the little old lady. "I have an answer for you, and it is this. The first turtle stands on the back of a second, far larger turtle, who stands directly under him." "What does this second turtle stand on?" persisted the scientist. This little old lady crowed triumphantly, "It's no use, sir. It's turtles all the way down." Right? Have you heard that saying before? Turtles all the way down? Anyone heard that before? No? Turtles all the way down. That's a good one. You can use it next time, and just for the fun of it. Okay. In other words, if you say that God was created by X and who created X, and on and on and on, right? And therefore, here we go. Therefore, we come to the conclusion that we say that God is not an effect at all, and he requires no cause at all. God is just it. Let's go through it. Just is. He cannot be created. He can only be discovered. Very, very interesting idea here. So if I were to ask you, okay, who gave us the iPhone? No? Thank you. Who invented the light bulb? Thank you. Who developed the airplane? By the way, the first plane could only make right-hand turns. Anything strange about these questions? No, no. All right, how about the next one? Who invented the mathematical equation of 2 + 2 = 4? Which professor came up with this idea? Of course, you're going to say that's a ridiculous question. 2 + 2 = 4. It doesn't require someone to invent it, not like the iPhone does, right? It's a fact. It doesn't need to be invented. It just is. It's been there since the beginning of time. Only thing that needs to happen is it has to be discovered, like many other mathematical equations. And therefore, it is the same way with God. God doesn't need to be created. He's not an effect. And therefore, there's no discussion about who created it. God is in simple, like 2 + 2 = 4. It's just a fact. God exists. Now, this is again, I want to just make things easier for you. This is not going to help you sleep at night, knowing that God is just there and God is here, just like 2 + 2. It doesn't answer the question. To be fair, it's a question that really is beyond our comprehension. But we are explaining to you how Judaism deals with this very problem. Judaism doesn't try to say that somehow God was created at some point, but Judaism says God is a fact. God was always here. It's not an issue about who created it. Now, we're going to see this inside. Take a look in your book on page 16. You're going to see different expressions that Judaism uses to describe God. So I'm going to go through this in Hebrew and then translate it in English. If you look in your book, you'll see this. So it says, you see the two columns in your book, page 16. It says everything in God. So the Hebrew term for everything. This comes, by the way, from the book of Space to Maimonides, written by Rabbi Yosef Albo. And he says as follows, and this Maimonides uses this word. I remember learning Maimonides for the first time and learning the word metzius. The word metzius in Hebrew means an existence. It's an interesting word for someone that's never learned theology before. Metzius actually thinks sounds like something different in Hebrew as a fine. I guess there's a similarity to it. But metzius actually means an existence. It has a metzius to it. It has an existence to it. I'm getting carried away a little bit. But metzius means an existence. So in Hebrew, an existence is called metziut. Is that true in modern Hebrew too, by the way? It is, right? Metziut. How do we refer to God in Jewish literature? Matzu b'loy b'metzius. An existence unlike any other form of existence. Every other form of existence is what? Now let's go down the next category, is Eshari HaMetzius, which means it's contingent existence. Anyone here not a contingent existence? Raise your hand. No one, all contingent, right? We're contingent on nuts and food and good food and clothing and all sorts of things. Primarily our parents who brought us into this world. That's the contingent existence that life exists with. So a contingent existence. God is, in Hebrew, next column to the left, a necessary existence. In Hebrew, a mechuyav hametziut. Again, back to the first column, everything is called in Hebrew, or just the English translation, dependent existence. In God is considered an independent existence. This is really a big, something that is really difficult to understand, but it does help us to think of God as beyond anything that we can even comprehend, right? So I ask a question, what's closer in number, 1 to 1,000,000 or 0 to 1? What's closer, 1 to 1,000,000 or 0 to 1? 0 to 1? No, 1 to 1,000,000 is closer than 0 to 1. You can multiply 0 as many times, you won't get to 1. You can multiply 1, you get to 1,000,000. God is, in this respect, God is a 0. We can't jump from 0 to 1. It is something that we can't, there's no relationship. God is independent, an existence unlike other existence, necessary existence, and independent existence, and there's no cause to it. He is like, or another mathematical, or he's like the mathematical equation of 2 plus 2. Of course, God is not a mathematical equation, but for us to comprehend it, he is a necessary existence. Where do we see this in the Bible? This is a good question. Where do we see this idea in the Bible? Maybe I'm just making it up. So there's actually, let's read it. Let's have some reading in the classroom here. Anyone like to read? Okay, Chris, would like to read for us. Text on the page.
Moses.
Thank you. So, does anyone remember this verse in the Torah? Right, God meets Moses at the burning bush, introduces himself, tells him to go take the Jews out of Egypt, and God says, he says, how should I introduce you to the Jewish people, right? So he says, what should I tell them? And this seems to be an important idea, right? Because everything has a name, right? Not every name describes anything. So if you call your dog Charlie, that doesn't, the name is arbitrary. But very often, a name does define a description of what it is. A heater is called a heater because it heats the room, right? So it's an expressive title. So Moses wanted to understand what was God's expressive title. What should he give? What does God respond? Text 10b, God replies to Moses, Eya Asher Eya. Okay? Which means, what does Eya mean? Eya means to exist. So God was saying, the existing being that is the existing being, or the existence that exists. It's an interesting way to describe God to the Jewish people. I mean, if you were God at that moment, how would you describe yourself to the Jewish people? Would you have nothing else to say about yourself than being the existence that exists? You could say, hey, Jews, guess who? I created the heavens and earth. I revealed myself to Abraham, your great-great-grandfather, etc., etc. I'm all powerful. But however, he says, no, I'm the existing being of that existing being. Because in a way, this is the most defined way that we can define God, as being an existent being. Something that exists forever. Let's take a look at this in Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed. Let's have someone online read for us. Let's see. Belinda, can you read for us text number 11, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Essential existence. This phrase conveys that God's existence is not an ordinary existence. We could summarize the concept as such. God is the existence that exists. In other words, he is an essential and absolute rather than a contingent existence. Should I go on?
No, that's good. Thank you. So he's an essential and absolute rather than a contingent existence. So, I mean, if you want to know where does God come from, unfortunately, we're getting stuck in our little boxes. We said earlier, creating God in our own image by trying to find God as something that is an image of ourselves. We are a created image, while God must be a created image. What we've just said is that God is beyond something that exists like we do, which has a cause and effect to it. Let's go through some of these slides to help us clarify. Okay. What am I, the creator of the world? What God could have said, but rather he said the existence being, and here we go again. God, most outstanding quality is that he exists. In other words, he exists not because he was created, but just because he exists. Now, this really is difficult for us to understand. I'll share a little anecdote with you. Just a story of Chalm. Anyone been to Chalm here? You know what Chalm is? Chalm are where the smartest people in the world live. They were so smart that the Jewish world made lots of jokes about how stupid they were. But really, they were very smart. There are lots of jokes about Chalm. It's like won't say the nationality, you fill in the blank, jokes of a certain nationality. Well, we Jews have jokes about certain nationality, people from that nationality called Chalm. And the joke goes as follows. They tell the story about the foolish citizens of Chalm when they heard about the invention of the locomotive. And they sent one of the wisest men to the nearest city to check if this rumor is true that there's this thing called a locomotive. Too many in that town in Chalm couldn't believe that such a thing was possible. The messenger arrived in Warsaw and he made his way to the train station. And sure enough, there was a piercing sound of a train's whistle reaching his ears. And with utter amazement, he watched as the train rolled into the station. He approached the train's engineer and asked him to explain how this marvelous novelty worked. The conductor explained the ins and outs, and the messenger absorbed it all. But once he finished, the engineer watched as a messenger began looking under the seats, inside random compartments, and underneath the train cars. "What are you looking for?" asked the engineer. "Listen," said the wise messenger. "Since time immemorial, motion has been powered by horsepower. I heard your explanation about how the train works, but I'm confident there's got to be a tiny horse somewhere in here." And sometimes we are that person. We have that fixed understanding about how things operate, and we think we have to apply that fixed understanding to everything in our world, including into our existence of God. And when we do, we are a little bit like that foolish Thelmite, looking for the horse driving the locomotive. You have to understand that sometimes things are, especially many times when it comes to God, things are vastly, vastly different and beyond our real understanding and comprehension. Okay. There we go. One more slide here. All right. How are we doing so far? All right. Yep. Okay, your final question. 20 minutes left for the final question. 18 minutes left. Big one of the night. Is God a he, or a she, or a they? Right? Who thinks it's a good question? Good question? Show of hands. God the he. Raise your hand if God's the he. Raise your hand if God's a she. They? They. Okay. The reality is, right? It's a good question. That is, after everything we've learned today, shouldn't really be a question, right? What have we learned today that should make this not a question? God's limitless, right? God's beyond our comprehension, right? He definitely doesn't have a physical body. He's kadosh, detached, removed, we said. So the question of is God a masculine or feminine, in a way, it doesn't make any sense. If God, go. Very good. We're going to actually talk about that in a moment. But really, if we think about God in the ways that we've discussed God, it doesn't really make sense to say God is either male or female. Clearly, God is non-binary, genderless, right? You can't say about God in any way he's a man or a woman. So what's the question? Where does this question come from? Anyone know? Why are we bothered by this question? Come on, guys, wake up. Why are we bothered by this question? We are bothered. Where do we see God's being in the masculine? Our Father, how do we refer to God? Our Father, our King. That's masculine, right? Over and over again, it comes down to terminology. Read the Torah, the Bible, read the prayer book. What do we find? Generally, we find God in masculine terms, right? Back to the question. So is God male or female? What would you say? Male. Right? Seemingly, more often. So now, so sometimes you some people would like to say as follows: you know why God is referred to as male in the Bible? Because those who wrote the Bible, right? Those who wrote the Bible were a bunch of chauvinistic men, and therefore being that they wanted to describe something as awesome as God, therefore they chose the male. We today are smarter. And we're going to correct this wrong against the fair agenda. Refer to God as she. Right? That's what some people will offer as what's wrong with that answer?
Well, then it's back to being referred to as male again. It's the same. Whether it's male or female, then we have the same problem.
Okay, so first of all, but that's Joel's saying, if you're going to call him female, you're also back to, well, why female? But why male? So just to discount that answer right away, which is that the people who wrote the Bible or the Talmud are chauvinistic, and therefore chose something as all great things to be used and use the terminology in the male, then we would have the question why then everything great should always be used in the male terminology. And we know if you look in your book, page number 19, look inside, everybody. Let's have a look at some of the things that the Torah uses in the feminine. The Jewish nation in the feminine. The Torah is a feminine word, Torah, right, with a hey at the end. It's feminine. The divine soul, the neshama, feminine. How about the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael? Is it a he or a she? She. How about the Shabbat? Also, the queen, the bride, Shabbat bride, always in the feminine. No. So we see that it's not about being chauvinistic. There are many great things that is found in the Talmud and in the Torah that the feminine is used, not the. So the question is, that's not a fair answer. So we want to just discount that. It's important to discount that because people do say that and they use that as an excuse, the chauvinistic rabbis, to make the point and use in some prayer books of non-Orthodox denominations will actually see God as only strictly or they'll share the feminine and the masculine. Now you can say there's another answer, which is that in Hebrew, right? Who's Hebrew? Well, Michael's here from Israel, right? All nouns are ascribed to gender. There's no such thing as gender neutral nouns. You don't have it in Hebrew, correct? There's no it. And therefore, since there's no it, if they're able to use a gender neutral noun, then we would have described God as an it. But since the Bible is using a Hebrew language, and in Hebrew language there's no it, therefore we had to choose a gender. We chose the masculine. Because we're stuck with a gender neutral language, which is here, and other languages too, like French. Now, what's wrong with that answer? What's wrong with that answer is very simple. Well, I'll tell you. We know the Torah is exact. And if we just say, well, the Torah had no choice, they had to choose one or the other, chose one, but it really didn't make a difference. That's the way we're taking away the exactitude of the Torah. And we believe the Torah was written by divine inspiration, by divine command, and everything is exact. If the Torah chooses to use words in the masculine, there must be a reason for it. It must describe who God is in some form. Because if it was just about choosing one or the other, then instead of saying our Father in heaven, we should have said our mother, the Queen. What's wrong with that? Right? My mother would be happy, and my wife. So before we said God is genderless. Remember we said that? God's beyond any type of description. And then we said, well, then why is God described almost in exclusive in male terms? Go through some of these slides. We're the authors of the Bible and prayer book, human beings and sexes. It's true. Anything we consider valuable would be described in masculine terms. That is not the case at all. Wow, these slides are good. They make my job so easy. Should just read the slides. Okay. Okay, here we go. Entity is describing her as feminine. We went to this. Guys enjoying the slideshow? All right. In Hebrew, all nouns are considered to be belong. Here we are. All right. So this is where we're at now. So if we are choosing, why not choose feminine terms? So we said before that God is genderless. Is that really true that God is genderless? Eric said a very interesting line before, and we're going to come back to Eric's line. And we actually said this at the beginning of the class. Text number 12. Let's have somebody in the classroom here read text number 12. We're going to have Eric read for us. Hope everything is working. I can't say anything. Okay. Just need to put like that. Very good. Thank you. So so what do we see over here? God created, who did he create in his image?
Man.
Who did he create? Adam and Eve, male and female. So what does God have inside of him? A bit of male and a bit of female, right? If he created man and woman in his image, then he must have a little bit of male and female, right? So he can't be genderless. Got to be intersex, both male and female. Does that make sense? No one thought they're coming into the class and they're going to leave thinking that God is intersex, but that's what we're saying. We left the, okay, so what does this really mean? When we say God is both male and female, what does that mean? I'm trying to keep you guys awake. But, okay, so correct. But what it means is that, well, it means that God sometimes manifests himself as male, and sometimes he manifests himself as female. He's interchangeable in that. And therefore, sometimes God's names are male, and sometimes God's names are female. Please read for us. Take the mic. Text number 13. Dual gender names.
Let's start stating. God's morality. They are all unified.
Thank you. Okay. So we have both God referred to as in the male and in the female. So when we refer to God as in the male, we're not just being chauvinistic, but actually what are we saying? It's God choosing to express himself through the masculine manner, and vice versa. When he chooses a Hebrew name because it reflects a feminine attribute of God. So what is this male and female attribute of God? What does that mean? And what does it mean when God is expressing himself in the masculine form of the male and female? Now, typically, when we think of male and female, we think of two separate things, man and woman. But actually, in Judaism, when we think about the relationship between male and female, what do we think of? Two sides to one coin. Man and woman get together and have a relationship, they become one. They are one, they're one of the same. Let's read this idea comes from the Bible of the male and female bonding together. Let's have somebody on Zoom. Who would like to read for us, hasn't read on Zoom for us? Text number 14, page 21.
Michael, I've got it.
Okay, thank you.
Therefore, man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, And they shall become one flesh.
They should become one flesh. Okay, so here we are. But this idea is, and we say this when people get married, we say it's so nice that Chaim and Zelda are getting married. They're two halves of one soul, right? You heard that before? It's an idea, man and woman, to get together. They become one. And of course, when is that oneness, that unity manifests itself the most? During intimacy, right? When you have the connection of man and woman together, which is both a physical and a spiritual connection, you have the completeness, the oneness of this union between man and woman. So you see that there is man and woman, not two separate entities, but they are one of the same. They are connected. They're one. They're two halves that become one in marriage, in a relationship. So now we're understanding a little more about when we talk about God in the masculine, and then let's say we're talking about us, who's the feminine. God is a masculine. Who is the feminine over him? Guess what? It's us. It's creation, it's the Jewish people. They are the feminine. Now, if you think about our relationship between a male and a female, one is a giver and one is a receiver. Right? That is the nature of a male and female relationship. Now, important to note, when we talk about a female as being a receiver, we don't just mean a passive receiver, right? A woman doesn't just receive from her husband, but she takes from her husband and changes and creates something new as a child from that connection, from that with what she received from her husband, from her man. So the receiver, not passive, but it's actually taking and perfecting that which the man, and creating anew that which she received from her husband. In text number 15, just quickly, the idea is that we are in a marriage with God. It quotes in the Mishnah, in the day of his marriage, this refers to the giving of the Torah. So we are in this union with God. What does that tell us about God being the giver and we being the receiver? God being the masculine, the giver, and we being the receiver, as we see it, as it reflects in a relationship between man and woman, that we must be something really, really special if God trusts us to be the receiver of his relationship. So actually, by describing God in masculine terms as the giver, and therefore we being the receiver, says a lot more about us than it does about God. We are the ones who God chose to be his receiver. And what are we doing with what God, with being the recipient of God's giving? We are creating a universe. We are uplifting his universe. We're making the world that he gave us into something holy and special. We are living our life fulfilled to the highest purpose. Hence, God being the giver, us being the receiver. So this is the beautiful idea that we just said. Let's just finish the slides over here and finish the class. God, male giver, female receiver. When we refer to God in masculine terms, we speak of and to him as a giver or more. Okay, this last slide is important. Let's go back here. Just as in a marriage, both spouses need the other one in order to be complete. God needs us in order to be complete. This is a beautiful, powerful idea. So when we think about God being in the masculine, it's not something that makes us less, it makes us more, because he needs us, so to speak. God created an environment in which he needs us to be complete. Of course, this is all about God. God in his essence is beyond anything that we can comprehend, but in the way his relationship with us is, he has made himself vulnerable, so to speak, to need us as to be part of that relationship. Therefore, we are his receiver of his, and he being the giver. And in doing so, we both, so to speak, complete God. We connect, make that relationship. So I want to just conclude in just the end understanding of question number 4. God is neither male or female, but God manifests himself in both male and female modalities. Okay, my friends, this concludes the first class. Really appreciate you joining us. We want to just go through the key points as they're in the book, just to refresh us and keep these questions in our mind. And hopefully we'll get to more questions next week. We're going to follow through the last slideshow of the
Lesson 1. The basics. 1. Asking questions about God is not a sign of weakness in belief. Even the ardent believer must do so in an attempt to gain deeper understandings of God. It is important that our relationship with God encompasses our totality, and that our minds should understand what our souls naturally feel. 2. Many of our conceptions of God are incorrect and even childish. Like Abraham long ago, we need to first unknow the God of our current perception before we can gain an accurate understanding of the divine. 3. Although we can know much about God, He Himself is unknowable. The essence of idolatry is the attempt to concretize God and fit Him within a familiar framework to create a God in our own image. 4. In Jewish sources, we find depictions of God being located above in the heavens, and we are also told that God is everywhere. While these are both true from a certain perspective, there's a deeper reality. God contains the world, holding all its existence in His space. Everywhere is within God. 5. God's existence is radically different from the existence of all else. All things but God are contingent existences, brought into being by a cause, and by definition, they need not exist. God is a necessary existence, an existence that must be, and therefore has no cause. 6. On an essential level, God transcends gender and is non-binary. Yet God manifests Himself in both male and female modalities. When we refer to God in masculine terms, we refer to God as He manifests or behaves in a masculine manner, i.e. as our provider and husband. Doing so places emphasis on our importance to God and our relationship with Him.
Hey, thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know it's a very busy evening for everybody, and we hope to see you again next week at the same place, same time, on Zoom or in person. Again, have a wonderful week. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One second. Just end this. Night, everybody.
Night.